In Springfield Township, New Jersey, on Monday, August the 7th, 1972, a young 16-year-old Jeannette DePalma told her parents she was going to hitchhike or catch a train to see her friend before going off to her work. She wouldn't arrive at her place of work, and she was never seen alive again. It seemed as though she had simply disappeared. When learning that she hadn't showed up at her friends or her work, her parents, sick with worry, called the police. Weeks would pass, I believe 6 in all, and there was still no sign of Jeannette. Until one day a gruesome discovery was made. A dog out roaming the local wooded areas, where there is an old quarry, found something. The dog, whose owners lived close to the quarry, dragged it home. To the owner's horror, they noticed what looked like a decomposing human arm, and on closer inspection, they clarified it as such. The police were called. A search of the area that the dog always went brought them to the old quarry, more specifically a cliff in the quarry the locals named the Devil's Teeth. The first responders climbed the cliff and found the remains of a young woman. Jeannette's body had been found. It wasn't going to be easy to discover the cause of death, as her body was very decomposed. So no cause of death could be found after the autopsy. There was no sign of drug use in her body or any drug paraphernalia around the area. There were no signs of stabbing or bullet wounds, and no broken bones, although an unusually high level of lead was found. The coroner suspected strangulation, and the case was now considered a homicide. A report that a homeless man, who the locals called Red, was living in a camp near the area could have been involved, but after some inquiries he was apparently dismissed. The police continued investigating, but lack of information from the public and apparent, allegedly, differing stories from her friends and family made it difficult. Eventually, the case would go cold. Halloween was fast approaching, and the locals were fearful. Jeannette's death hadn't been solved. Why did the people of this small community feel this way? Well, the media, let's not forget pre-internet, meant people had to rely on newspapers and the usual news outlets for most newsworthy content. Then, an article appeared in the September the 29th, 1972 edition of the Elizabeth Daily Journal, and it was entitled "Girls Sacrificed in Witch Rite." It made the following claim: investigation into the death of 16-year-old Jeannette DePalma is focusing on elements of black witchcraft and Satan worship. A review of death scene photos, according to reports, is leading authorities to believe the girl's death may have been in the nature of a sacrifice. Pieces of wood, at first thought to be at the scene by chance, are now seen as symbols. One searcher said 2 pieces of wood were crossed on the ground over her head. More wood framed the body like a coffin. Another person who was there said, "I guess if you were looking for signs, they were there." This was apparently the first article to link the case with any form of supernatural connection. Before this, Jeannette's case wasn't getting much publicity until some witnesses who were at the scene when she was discovered claimed they had noticed occult-looking objects around her body, like makeshift wooden crosses, and even a report that she was laid inside a pentagram surrounded by a coffin shape made from logs and twigs. They claimed stones had been placed around her head like a halo. There was even reports that animal remains were scattered around. It was also claimed to look like a human sacrifice. The story was fueled further once people heard the name of the cliff that she was found on was dubbed years earlier, I might add, as the Devil's Teeth. Many people considered it the work of devil worshippers, Satanists, or a coven of witches who were apparently active in the Watchung reservation at that time. Her family and the family's pastor thought that she could have become a target because of the work she did for their church, the Assemblies of God Church. But once the media circus began, the church would eventually distance themselves from the strange case. Well, the rumours would linger on for a few more years, and eventually Jeannette's case began to grow even colder. Her name and her story would merge into an urban legend. Then, in the late 90s, some anonymous letters arrived at the offices of a magazine called Weird NJ. I believe that's for New Jersey. The two reporters from the magazine were intrigued by the letters. Mark Moran and Jess Pollock tried to research this mysterious case, but they were met by obstacles. The Springfield police claimed to have lost Jeannette's case file in a flood. Jeannette's former acquaintances wouldn't go on record to tell what they knew. Undeterred, Pollock and Moran continued to dig deeper into this mysterious and baffling case. 4 decades after the murder of Jeannette DePalma, some truths were going to be revealed. After years of denials from former prosecutors that there were copies of the case file, it was discovered that, for some reason, they had lied about them being destroyed in a flood, and copies did exist. So the intrepid reporters and a family member of Jeannette's asked a former director of communications in 2019 to submit a file request under the Open Public Records Act and the Freedom of Information Act. Due to a certain, let's say, illness, it took nearly 2 years for Jeannette's case file to finally fall into the hands of Pollock. In February of 2021, Jeannette's case file with all the details, including crime scene photos that had previously been described as missing, were there. Although the photos of Jeannette's body had been thoughtfully redacted, the scene was clear to see. The magazine felt confident in its findings, stating that there was no sign of occult activity to be seen. There was no halo of stones, no wooden crosses made of twigs, no pentagram, and no signs of animal remains. There was no altar or arrows carved in trees. The crime scene diagram, drawn by UCPO investigator Glenn Owens, shows there are no signs of the occult. The logs that were said to look like a coffin round her body were just fallen branches from an old tree that was slightly away from the body. The two crossed branches next to her body were already there before Jeannette's body had fallen. She had fallen near to them and her arm was lying over them. They had just fallen from an old tree. For many years, the Springfield police had claimed that the spot where Jeannette was found had been used as a party spot where drugs were often used by the youth that were living there, and that Jeannette probably overdosed at that spot and left to die by others who were with her and too afraid to talk, fearing the ramifications of their actions. But the photo shows the area where Jeannette's remains were found was totally overgrown with large plants and what looked like thick bushes. It showed no signs of an area a group would gather. There was also no evidence of drug use or drug paraphernalia around her body, as previously stated. Her handbag was missing, but the contents of it lay in a pile. Her silver cross necklace was also missing. These were possibly taken as souvenirs. In the contents that was found in the pile was a vial with some clear liquid. As far as we know, it was never tested, so we don't know what was in it. How did she get to the cliff? The only possible way was for her to be walked to the area or carried to the area. So many questions. Why insist for many years the case files were destroyed? Were other murders of young women in surrounding areas possibly linked? Was there a serial killer wandering around their neighbourhood? Jeannette's case is still an open case, and there are still good people out there fighting for her, keeping her name alive. They hope one day to find justice for Jeannette and her family.